5 questions, 4 or 5
Yeah.
questions.
You have a really low voice though, so speak up.
Okay. Okay. Do you think income taxes and the federal tax code are fair, and what changes should be made?
I think that, well, there's you said income taxes and the federal tax code. A lot of people actually pay more in Social Security and Medicare taxes than they do in income taxes. And the Social Security tax only applies to your first, I'm not quite sure what the number is now, but I think it's something like the first $110,000 worth of income. Above that, you don't pay Social Security tax anymore. So I actually think that should be changed. I think that the Social Security tax should be applied to all income, not just the first 110,000. On the income tax itself, I think that the top rate that the richest people pay should be raised. In the 1950s, the top rate that the richest people paid was 91%. And I don't know if I'd go all the way back to that, but I would go further than the top rate now, which is, I believe, 39.6%.
Okay. What can the federal government do in a law, policy, or action to ensure a growing economy for all Americans?
Well, one thing the federal government could do is invest in infrastructure and start repairing our roads and bridges and schools and things like that, because those are all deteriorating, and as they deteriorate, that has a bad impact on the economy. To ensure that all Americans share in economic growth, one thing that it could do is change the laws that relate to forming unions, because in the 50s, 60s, 70s, economic growth was more widely shared, largely because a lot more people were in unions who could demand wage increases when corporate profits were increasing. Recently, you've seen corporate profits increasing, but wages not increasing, and that's partly because of the decline of unions. And one very simple thing you could do to make it easier for people to organize is this. It's against the law to fire somebody for trying to organize a union, but there's hardly any teeth to the law. If you can prove that you were fired for trying to organize, you might get your back pay in a few years. By contrast, for example, I used to be a federal Justice Department lawyer enforcing the environmental laws, the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. If you violated the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, then you're subject to a penalty of up to $25,000 per day per violation. If you had those kind of penalties for violating the labor laws, then it would be much harder for employers to violate the labor laws, and it would be easier to organize. So that's not something that in and of itself, well, there's an argument it would improve the economy in general, but it would certainly improve the distribution of economic growth. And I mean, other things that you can do to promote economic growth include investing more in education. That's not a cure-all that some people think it is, but it is important.
Okay. What should Portland use income taxes for?
Well, Portland right now only has one income tax, which is kind of a goofy income tax, the arts tax, which is not like a normal income tax because everybody pays the same amount unless you're really, really poor. I have recently proposed that Portland should adopt an income tax for transportation because we need more money for transportation, and I'm the transportation commissioner. And an income tax, I think, is the fairest way to raise it. There's no particular reason why an income tax should only be used for transportation as opposed to anybody else, as opposed to anything else. So what the city does mostly is police, fire, housing, parks, transportation, a couple other things. I don't think that I happen to be proposing an income tax for transportation because that's what we need the most money for the most right now, but there's no particular reason to restrict an income tax to that as opposed to the other things.
Okay. Can you explain the Portland street fee and how you feel about it?
What the Portland street fee is right now is sort of in question. We initially proposed something which is what a lot of other cities have done around the state, where everybody pays pretty much the same amount, except that people in apartments pay less than people in houses because people in apartments kind of use the roads less because not because necessarily because they drive less, although that's part of it, but also because like the garbage truck only has to come once to an apartment building, whereas it comes to each individual house. We pulled back from that partly because a lot of people said, well, you're taxing rich people and poor people the same amount, and that's not fair. So recently we came out with another proposal that said that, it laid out a schedule for what people at various income levels would pay, with rich people paying a lot more than poor people, although it wasn't a normal income tax. It's a percentage of income that keeps on going up as income goes up. We had it limited to $75 a month for the richest people, starting at about $350,000 and then staying that way. I thought that was a reasonable proposal, although that part of it was kind of goofy. The part where we limited the amount any rich person would pay was mostly something we did because we thought that some people who don't like an income tax would like it better if we had that limit. So we had a proposal that I liked, although I thought it could have been better. Now it seems like, the people we thought we were going to mollify, make feel better with the cap, don't feel better. And they're saying that they will campaign against anything called an income tax. So what we're trying to figure out now is, are we going to go ahead with an income tax that would probably be more conventional, like it's a percentage of income that goes up as your income goes up, and have a fight with those people who don't like it, or is there something that we can do that is closer to most people pay close to the same thing, and which maybe could avoid having that vote. So, personally, I would like to have a regular income tax where the poor people are exempt, and one idea we've talked about is people making between like $35,000 and $60,000 would pay 0.1% of the amount they make between $35,000 and $60,000, and people making between $60,000 and $100,000 would pay 0.2% of the amount they pay between $60,000 and $100,000. And people making over $100,000 would pay 0.3% of the amount they make of 1% of the amount they make between $100,000 and $250,000, and people make over $250,000 would pay 0.4% of the amount above that. That's something that I would actually personally like. I don't know if that's something that we will be bringing forward because it raises the prospect of a big battle that we might want to try to avoid.
Okay. What's your position on income taxes? Like, how they should be given out?
Well, I think the income tax is a good tax because it's based on people's ability to pay. And I think it's particularly important now to base taxes on people's ability to pay because we have huge income inequality. The middle class has kind of shrunk, and the gap between people in the middle class and people in the top 5% and the top 1%, and especially the top 1/100th of 1%, is huge. So, and people in the middle haven't gotten a raise since about 1999. Most people's income has been stuck. Pretty much 90% of the population, people's income has been stuck or falling for 15 years. So asking people to pay more taxes when their income is stuck is hard. However, people at the top, their incomes have been going up, so they're benefiting the most from living in this country, being in this society. So it seems to make sense to me to ask them to pay a higher income tax rate, especially as long as there's this huge gap. If there weren't that big a difference between people at the top and people in the middle, then it might make sense to have not that much of a difference in tax rates. When there's such a huge difference, I think it makes sense to have a big difference in tax rates. We also, we do have a history in America of having much higher tax rates on rich people. I told you we had a 91% tax rate in the 1950s. Now, that's not the 91% rate applied to all of their income, but like if you made $1,010,000, you pay $9.10 on the million, on the last $10. And it's, people at that point thought that the tax system was fair, and rich people still made money, but not as much. And we had better funded public services. And we also had a growing economy.
How do you think the street fee should be dealt out?
Well, I think I just told you, I like, you mean how we should spend the money, or how we should raise the money?
How we should raise it?
I like the idea of a tax where, like, it would be slightly different numbers for married people than single people. For married people who file tax returns together, exempting the first $20,000 to $35,000 of income, and then above that have a 0.1% rate that applies to a chunk of income, a 0.2% rate that applies to the next chunk, a 0.3% rate that applies to income over 100,000, and a 0.4% rate that applies to income above 250,000. I think that that's something that will raise about the amount of money that we're looking for, and I think that would be fair. Most people would pay something, poor people wouldn't pay anything. The rate goes up a bit as people's income goes up.
Okay. I think that's all our questions.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Who else have you interviewed?